Do we have free will? Today on Where We Begin. Welcome back to Where We Begin, the podcast that answers some of the toughest objections to Christianity today. A podcast, not the
I was going to say, I
podcast.
appreciated that. It's like, we are the podcast.
One and only.
The podcast that addresses people's questions. Wow. You have high hopes for today.
We are the podcast that answers these questions with this host and these speakers. So, and that's true. We're the only one that does it.
That is true.
So I'm Derek, again, the host, Derek Caldwell, full stop. And we've got Alicia Wood, Lou Phillips, and Xandra Carroll once again. How's everyone doing this week?
Good.
Spectacular.
Really good week
How are
for me.
you,
Really.
Derek? Yeah, how are you, Derek?
So good.
Yeah?
So good. Yeah.
With your Bonhoeffer
I got
on
my
your shirt?
Bonhoeffer shirt on. One time, I don't think people know that Lou dressed up as me once.
That's
did.
true.
It
It
was
was
amazing.
For Halloween.
For Halloween.
Yeah.
We wore the same outfit, and he wore a name tag that said,
Bonhoeffer's little boy.
yeah. And I think he thought it was an insult, but I took it as a compliment.
Derek is a Bonhoeffer freak, for anybody who doesn't know.
Someone say he probably
loves
appreciates him
Bonhoeffer.
too much, right? Maybe to the point of idolatry or...
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I have sacrificed things before pictures of him, so I do think I may have crossed the line.
Oh,
but
gosh.
We're
yeah.
getting emails about
Well, we
that
just
one.
lost-
He's
we
joking.
just lost a couple
JK.
subscribers.
JK.
I'm joking. Wink. So for this episode, I want to start out first with a little thought experiment. Lou, we're going to need both of your arms here. Sorry, do we want to
Do we need a
call
pause?
cut on this?
Wait for you.
So we're going to need to use it. So everybody stick their arm out like this and
Both
just
or
Which arm
one?
does it have
just
to
one,
be?
pick
one.
one. And then we're going to just, at some point you need to raise your arm up like that and just do it whenever you want.
Raise your arm up?
Or sorry, just your hand like that.
Lou's going to sit here for
Lou.
20 minutes.
Come on, okay. Now, when you did that, what was the process? Did you have the thought first and then you raised your hand? Is that how you experienced that happening? Would you say? That?
Yes. Yeah.
So before you do anything, you have to think it and then it happens.
Yeah.
Well, there was a study done by a gentleman named Benjamin Libet, who hooked people up to basically look at their brain waves and what's going on when they do something. And so he would have people do that, and then he would have them time when they had made the decision to do it, and then and then time when it actually happened. Before they made the decision, he noticed there was something going on in their brain that before they thought to do it, they had this impulse as if they were forced to think that they were doing
I know
it.
where we're going today. This is good.
I know.
I like
from
this.
the beginning, I knew where
I had
we were
no
going.
idea where we're going. I
So,
like this.
I don't know if you
I don't know
know
what the
this.
question is specifically, but I'm liking this.
I don't know if you know this experiment, but from this,
Wait, sorry. Before you go. So he said before they lifted it, there was something that forced their thoughts to happen?
well, just that there was some sort of
Like a neurological
determination.
marker.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there was something found that you think you're doing this when you think, oh, I'm going to raise my hand now. But actually, there's something that happens before that makes you think, raise your hand now, and then you raise your
Oh,
hand.
boy.
Yeah.
So,
Sounds theologically correct to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
oh
yeah,
goodness,
yeah.
So that's the question. He said basically this is proof that free will doesn't exist. Now in later life, I do think that he sort of changed that a little bit, but and to be fair, there are people who have said there are issues with this experiment, clearly for various reasons, but. So you guessed it. They don't know the question before we start, but you guessed it. This week we're talking about free will. And essentially the question is this: do we have free will? We sort of, if anyone remembers season 1, we talked about this a little bit with the issue of the simulation. We're in a simulation and it sort of touched on this a little bit. But there's different versions of this question. So first, before we get into some of the different versions of this, it's not all the theological, but we will get to that. I know Lou's dying to talk about John Calvin.
Our theological differences might shine through a little bit on this one.
A little bit.
So we good.
But before we get there, hopefully we'll find some things that have some common ground onto as well. But first, I mean, what do you think is in that question? When someone says, do we have, the first time they hear that maybe you don't have free will, what is the concern? Because you do experience life as if you have free will. Like should that be good enough? You experience it, whether it's real or not, you live it like it is, or like, what is the real? There seems to be this existential dread when you find out that perhaps you don't have freedom to do what you're doing, but you're being sort of,
Yeah.
I
think it changes I think for a lot of people, it changes the meaning of things, right? So I actually don't love Lou, or I don't love Xandra. I actually beyond my control. So it changes a lot of things. It changes what things mean. It changes what things, like how you value certain things, or how you engage with certain things, your actions, it changes what all of those mean. So I can still do those things, but it's like me going up to somebody and giving them a hug and say, I love you, versus them holding a knife to my throat and I say, I love you to them, but it's the same words, right? The same action, but it means different things because one situation I was forced, one I was not. And so it deals with kind of the implication about what the meanings of everything that you do is. I think that's one of the reasons that people are resistant.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like, what's the point? Like if this is true, especially if there's a God and I have no free will, how unfair. Like what a pointless life if that's how he operates.
I mean, and do you think, this isn't one of the questions, but do you think that's fair? Like, does there have to be a freedom of choice to truly love? Or can you love truly even if you couldn't have ever done anything other than that?
I think there has to be a freedom of choice to be human beings, not just to love, but to be, think of like our name as a species is Homo sapiens, like the wise ones, basically. Like you shouldn't have wisdom if you can't even make we were given wisdom because we are choice-making beings. So to exercise your wisdom is to exercise your volitional will, which is choice-making. So I think it kind of feels like it goes against our ontology. It goes against the very nature of what we are to say that you don't have freedom of choice, that you don't have free will. Plus, as a Christian, I mean, free will is what separates Christianity from like so many other ideologies. I mean, you look at Islam where things are really predetermined. I mean, in the Hadiths, there's one passage that talks about how Allah has apportioned sins for his people, and it specifically talks about adultery. Like he's determined how much adultery you'll commit in your life. And that's very different from Christianity, which says you repent for what you've done. You come back to the Lord and you say, I'm sorry, and you own it. You say, this is my decision. As David said, against you alone have I sinned, O Lord, and done what was evil in your sight. So I think it's a hallmark of Christianity to have free will and to have freedom, not just for the sake of love, but for the sake of what we are as beings. And I don't think that necessarily goes against, the fact that God is sovereign. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that on that, but anyway.
Yeah.
And
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, and going along with that, I think if God had wanted a world in which beings weren't free, he would have created a different world. So he creates a world in which you have this tree, right? You got all these things. Here's the tree of life and tree of knowledge of good and evil. Like you have the opportunity to be free and do something that you want. And I think had free will not been important to us or to him, he would have created us. And he didn't need to put that tree there. He could have just been like, there you go, here I am. This is your only option. And so I think just the nature in which he created things kind of demonstrates his desire that free will is important.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, that one just kind of popped up there. But so first, before we get into maybe where we're going to see more of a disagreement, perhaps.
He's just quiet. He's just waiting. That's all.
He's waiting.
No, I think we have free will. I think we just need to define what free will is.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think we need to define what sovereignty is, because I think any good person who has reformed theology or Calvinist, like they're not going to say, absolutely, this is a simulation and you have no choice. It's like, no, but you need to know what God's sovereignty means, and you need to know what does it mean to have libertarian free will. Is that what we have here, or is it something of a variation of that?
Yeah. And it's interesting too when, because sometimes, and I won't take long on this, but Augustine is sort of this interesting figure in church history where young theologian Augustine had to debate with Manichaeans who have this highly deterministic, no freedom sort of view. And so he sounds very much like someone who's saying, yeah, of course you have free will and the choices are yours to make and God's not to blame for anything that you choose to do. And then later he's arguing against Pelagians who say we're sort of born free without sin and born like we don't have to sin or anything like that. And so he comes out much harder on the other side of things, depending on who he's debating with, which is this interesting thing because we will find in the scriptures you see both of those things affirmed, which is why these debates still continue to exist because it's just they're both there, and we don't really like nuance, and we have to sort of pick one hard side or the other. But before we get to that, and that's a big preamble to that. But before we get to that, I do want to ask a couple of questions that you could see someone who's more of a skeptic asking. This is not the Christian theologian who's trying to figure out how exactly does this work out. I mean, some Christians will ask this as well. But so the first one would be this: if this is a kind of an older one, if God has foreknowledge, we don't have any sort of will other than what he determined. So is there a necessary connection essentially between God's foreknowledge and our freedom? If he knows what's going to happen, does that mean that we actually freely did anything? Especially if he created a world in which you wouldn't have ever done anything else. He created this world in which you would have made these choices. Does that count as freedom?
I think it's a false contrast. It's like a false dichotomy there. I don't think those two have to go opposite of each other, and that's the problem that I think we immediately. And I can see why superficially it seems like that's what you have to do, because it seems like if I have free will, that means God isn't sovereign. But if God is sovereign, that means I can't possibly have free will. But I think that comes down to how we define it, and it also gets under the complexity. I mean, this is I feel like people don't like this answer, but there's aspects of God. And this would make sense if God does exist. There's going to be attributes of his that are just mysterious. Like if we're created beings, the idea that you and I could possibly comprehend everything about him would be a little asinine, actually, to think about that. If you really are, if you are the created being, for you to assume that you could actually then comprehend every aspect of how he works things together, I just think it's just the epitome of arrogance. I've been there though. It's not even like I'm saying anybody else at the field. Like I've wrestled with it because it's like no,
famously arrogant. No,
yes, thank you. So yeah, you completely. I don't know where I'm going. That's it. You just dropped me. I lost my point.
I'm sure it was good.
I just think anybody who takes a stance.
Yeah, I think you need to
think you know it all.
Yeah, like. There's going to be an aspect of mystery to how God actually. I think I actually did this in another podcast that we did. Maybe it was the one on the Matrix or whatever, which I did not enjoy at all.
Really?
I didn't. It's this. So scientists usually do this too. It's like, does light travel in particles or waves? It's like, it's both. And we actually still don't know why. It doesn't make sense that it would, because it either typically things travel in particles or waves. There's something about the bothness here that, to your point, it's the nuance, and we hate it. Like we don't like not having a clear-cut answer. We don't like having to be like, actually, it's yes and it's both and. It's like, but how does that actually work out? And I mean, this is why the debate has been happening for centuries, even amongst Christians. Like, how does this play raw? But I do think if we can get to it, there's a passage of scripture that I would love to point to where I do think it's very clear. It's both. And I think you're going to see one side emphasize more of like the sovereignty of God, and then one side's going to emphasize more your libertarian free will. But I think either of those by themselves is utterly crippling.
Okay. Like
does not work out even at livable. Like for
you can't go full on deism, and you can't go full on like occasionalism. I think we're all like in the concurrentism sort of category of like those three big categories, but you can't just say God created everything and then let it go, and everything is free will for us. And at the same time, you can't say he's predetermined every single thing, including your sins. I don't think any of us would go on that far extreme either.
Yeah, so it might be helpful even just to, for maybe quickly, like what would you say, each individually, if Lou, you mentioned we have to define free will. So in some sense, sounds like all of you are affirming, yes, as Christians, biblically, it's fairly clear. Yeah. It sounds like you're saying that free will is affirmed. Now, define that for us, I guess, if you can. What is the free will? Yeah.
I think. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
No,
are
I thought he was asking me.
Well, you don't have to go individually, but
Okay.
someone can say, and then if there are differences of
Liv.
opinion, yeah.
I would just say you have a volitional ability to exercise something. Sorry, I'm trying to make it sound so philosophical. You have the ability of making choices that you can be held accountable to. That would be my understanding of free will.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's good. And
Morally
actually
accountable. How about that? Yeah.
And actually, that's interesting too, because one of the other questions, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but one of the ones that to consider then would be, the scientific materialist, who still is high. So, like a famous example would be Richard Dawkins. Sam Harris is another one who they want to, on one hand, be highly ethical, and Richard Dawkins, so the God of the Old Testament is he has this whole like diatribe essentially on misogynistic, genocidal, infanticidal, xenophobic things, but at the same time says something like we're dancing to our own DNA. Mm-hmm. Sam Harris again wants to be very ethical and say religion is terrible. Look at all the bad it's caused in the world, but also we don't have free will. Everything we do is just responding to stimuli based on, our context, our biology, the limitations of our capacities and opportunities, and all these things. But in essence, I mean, would you say that is sort of a nonsense? Not to be uncharitable, but does that make sense? Can you not have freedom and be ethical and call for morality? Like, do you have to do the right thing, essentially, or to call people to do the right thing? Isn't there the essentially you have to be able to do the right thing at some level?
Yeah, I think, and Sam Harris, I know as well, he wrote that work, was it The Moral Landscape, something like that? So he does believe, you can do the right thing, but in a sense, maybe you're sort of pre-programmed to do the right thing. But I see it almost as bookends, where it's not just the before, it's also the after, where you can't actually make things right after you've messed up. Like, how do you ask for forgiveness if you're completely pre-programmed? What does that say about morality? Mm-hmm. And actually, I was reading through Viktor Frankl's work on logotherapy again recently. So he's the one who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He survived multiple concentration camps. Fascinating dude, but he was talking about his work with prisoners and what he calls the mysterium iniquitatum or something like that. It's a Latin term that I can never remember. Something
Sounds
like that.
Great.
Mysterium iniquitatum.
Yeah.
If it's wrong, we'll fix it later. But it's basically saying when you go to a prisoner and you say, you committed your crime because you were pre-programmed to, because of your upbringing, because of your biology, because of your psychological composition, and therefore you're not really guilty, but you just have to do your time, but we see that you're really the victim here. When you do that to a prisoner, the prisoner in his experience hated that. They wanted to be allowed to be culpable. Mm-hmm. And the reason was, reportedly, if they had chosen to do the wrong, then they could have chosen later on to better themselves and do the right thing later. There was a chance for redemption, a chance for forgiveness, a chance for betterment. So he was saying in that moment, when you're removing their culpability and their guilt, you're actually killing their hope for the future. It's the worst thing you can do to a human being.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah. That's incredible.
I do think, to Sam Harris's point, or what you're trying to bring up, it again depends on how you want to define, like, even the meaning and purpose of life. If your argument is that you and I are DNA dancing, and meaning is quite essential, it's not really a thing. We kind of just make it up, and we can pursue. It's like, sure, it works, but like, I think to your point, the way you even worded it, there's some logical gaps in there that you're just gonna have to. But again, to their point, critiquing us as Christians, where we have to, I just tried to explain, there's a mystery here. I'm not going to be able to, I can't flesh this out entirely. We're going to be like, solid point. But I do think the more coherent argument would be the Christian worldview on something like this versus you're completely determined, but make the world better. It's like, how? Like, what are we talking about here? And then, but I can see them saying, wait a second, so God is sovereign, but you can make free choices. How? It's like, okay, fair point. But I do think, if you're willing to take it all at face value and look at the details, even just the experience of the human life, in the way we just human history, I do think you can actually make a far better compelling argument from the Christian worldview than a secular scientist one.
Yeah, and along those lines, if we are 100% determined from a naturalistic atheist perspective, then nobody should be mad at me for being religious. This is how I'm programmed to be.
Point.
This is how what's best for my survival is for me to be religious, and it seems to be best for a lot of people's survival because a lot of people are religious. So it seems to be an essential part of what is important for the species to survive. So what we need to not say then is we need to eradicate religion, because then we're essentially saying we are going to eradicate our ability to survive well. And so that's kind of part of the challenge I have too, is if we're predetermined, then nobody should have any problem with any things that I believe and say and do, whether religious or not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, good point. Well, speaking of that, then I think it's probably, it's definitely time let's turn and talk about the theological issue that, so let me give you, this might be a caricature, but here's how. So if they wanted to critique us, if someone wanted to critique us and say, well, you're not saying anything different actually than what we're saying, here's what they might point out and say, actually, this is cruel. And you would have people, like Christopher Hitchens and others talking about how cruel this God is for the way he designed the world, and in ways that we might affirm as actually being true when we think through our theology and through how we study the Bible. So God is sovereign. I know we need to define that a little bit, and we've got a few minutes left, so that'll be easy. But God is sovereign. We are born into sin, and we couldn't be anything other than a sinner. God ordains all things. We can do nothing unless he frees us to do it. And those who go to heaven are chosen by God. Those who go to hell are either chosen by God to do so or are just leftovers that essentially fall into hell. And so God, in this view, might even ordain evil. What other outcome would there be? And so the question would arise, and now that's a stereotype of various different views. But the question would then be, if we sin, whose fault is it? We didn't ask to be born, couldn't choose to be born any other way, and apparently can't choose to act any other way. So how could God demand of us things we cannot do and then condemn us for not doing them? And that's kind of the sort of gauntlet question on this.
I think this might be getting into, and again, I know we don't have a ton of time, but the difference between redemption and sanctification, because I think that question might be sort of conflating those two things. So redemption is basically, I can't swim, I'm in the water, I'm drowning, and someone throws me, what do you call it, a life ring, something. And that was not in my power to save myself. Someone else had to reach out and save me. And that's what Jesus did on the cross. He did that for us. We didn't ask him to. He did it because of his love. But then there's the sanctification, which is, you read passages like, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And you're like, okay, well, you're already saved. So what does that mean? And I think that's where you are cooperating with the Lord, with what he is doing. That looks like obedience, spiritual growth, discipline, which, is not getting into legalism or anything like that, but we are meant to have spiritual disciplines, or we're meant to make our lives count. And so I think that's where the sanctification comes out. And again, we're born into sin. We didn't ask for that. Yes, okay, I can concede to that point. But also, we choose sins. We do. Honestly, every last one of us, we do things that we know are wrong. So there is a level of culpability there that I think differs from what we're born into, the nature that God saves us out of.
Well, do we have, but I guess maybe I like the analogy. So would we say that, do we have the ability to grab the lifesaver? Because that's the freedom part. Or does Jesus just swim out and grab a few who are passed out, face down in the water, and the others not?
Well, I mean, he says, I stand at the door and knock. You need to open that door for me to come in. Okay. So he's there knocking. He's throwing the life ring.
I just push it. I think that passage of scripture has been used not properly. That he's talking to the church there, because that's Revelation. I stand at the door and knock. I do think he says, seek seek after me and you will find me. But that I stand at the door and knock. That's specifically in relation to a church in Revelation.
Fair. Let's go to John. Anyone who would believe in me.
Yes, fair.
Anyone who would believe in me.
I'm just making sure. I was like, I just don't want people to.
Right? Yeah. Okay, not perish, but have eternal life.
Yeah.
So he's done the work, but what are you going to do?
Yeah.
I still think there's an application there.
Yeah.
And that's what I think. I think actually Acts 17 can be helpful on this, where it says that the God who made the world, from one man he made all nations of men that they should inhabit the whole earth. And God determined the time set for them and the exact places where they would live. God did this so men would seek him, reach out for him, and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. And I'm a little bit more, and I can't believe I'm actually saying this, like agreeing somewhat with Lou. I do think that there is a bit of a dual thing. I do think that God is a part of this process of helping us to discover who he is. But there's still an element where it's like he set us up. Okay, he's given us clues, he's given us hints, he's put us in places that are going to be more conducive to us, but he sets us up to say, okay, now that I've given you all this, what are you going to end up doing? So there is a bit in which there's like almost a facilitating, but at the end you're still choosing him. And I actually think this idea of there being a dual is actually way more beautiful to me, because it shows that God isn't just sitting back, arms crossed, not that he has physical arms, but work with me, looking and saying, I hope you guys running around like little ants down there figure out who I am. Like he is a part of us, of this relationship forming, and he wants that. And so he is doing what he can, this whole hound of heaven where he is in pursuit of us and he is trying to bring us unto him. So I actually do think there is a sense in which we have this free will. And I do think you look at Paul and that seems to be pretty clear that God was like, hello, dude, you're going to know who I am. So you see these things. It doesn't mean it happens in every case that everybody's a Paul, but it seems like it does happen in some. And so that's why I don't think it's choice A, Calvinism, choice B, Arminianism, choice C, Monism. I think it's choice D. I think it's the D that we'll find out when we meet him face to face, actually. And we'll actually, because there's things that he hasn't put in that don't make me necessarily confident to dig my stake into one particular position. I think that there's things he's given us enough to have great discussions and jostle things around and have an idea, but I don't think it's as solid and concrete as Jesus lived, died, and resurrected. And I think that's for a reason. Yeah. I think that would impact the way that we interact with each other if we thought it was only God who did it, or if we thought it was only us who did it. And I think it changed the way we interacted.
I think this whole conversation is like the linchpin of Christianity is grace. I would completely agree with the first, question that you put out, just how unfair outside of grace. If this is like every other, this is like every other religion, it's extremely unfair. I mean, I grew up in a religious household in a fairly wealthy country where I was taught that morality was a pretty advantageous thing for me to do. What are the chances that I live a life that's pretty good? Probably pretty high. Yeah. What about if I'm growing up in the slums of India and I've only ever seen betrayal, killing, rape, stealing? Didn't grow up with parents. Truly, what chance do I have that I would be good enough to fit your category of what does it mean to be good? Not very high, but in Christianity, that person is just as good a chance as me, in the sense that anyone that's willing to bow the knee to God and say, I need a savior, he's willing to save. It doesn't matter what you've done. That to me is why this whole thing changes, and why I think God's sovereignty is so beautiful. It's just the assurance that I don't have to, if salvation is on him, I don't have to feel like I've done anything for it, and I can actually just be freed to live the life he's designed for me. That is like so assuring to me. And I do think that's what separates Christianity from any other world religion. It is like, wow, it's not something that I have to earn, but it's actually something he's freely given me. And I think that's actually, I think it's one of the most powerful things that we have to offer. Never mind. I'm trying to think of because it is hard. It's like, because I would even, to make it difficult, was he the one that threw us in the water? That's the other problem with that one, is with a life, because and that's where it gets complicated. I don't understand how or why God did it the way, but what changes everything for me is the cross. And that is why we boast in the cross. We boast in nothing short of that, because this is the thing that makes sense of the God of Christianity, that I may not fully understand his role on all these things, yet he was willing to display a ridiculous and scandalous love for me and offer me grace. That tells me he's not this weird scientist just trying to throw an experiment out.
Yeah, I think, and the interesting thing on this too is like we kind of joke around sometimes, like we're going to have differences in theology, and it's true to a degree, but it is, I think, good to know that those differences actually, some of us have turned those differences into a very major thing, but it's about 0.005% of what we, and there's still a lot to agree with on that. We need grace. We can't do this without Christ, without his grace.
And none of us save people.
None of us we can't save people. We all do have freedom, and we've all used it for ill. So that's something that we can
if we all think too of our own, like, so we're all Christian here. Like I love thinking about my own story. As I grew up in a Christian household, I would say I to the best of my ability became a Christian when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And when I think back to my life, you immediately think of John 3:16, right? And then as you get older, you kind of look back at the door of salvation and you're like, he was pursuing me and I never even knew it. Like John 6 after that, no one comes to the Father. I mean, no one comes to me unless the Father draws. That is, I think, the initial point of salvation. This is where I'm going to be a little more upfront. It's like, I think it looks like I did it. I think it does look like I bowed the knee. But then you look at who he is, and when he reveals himself, I'm sorry, I just think he ruins you for good. Like when he actually shows up, there's nothing you can do but bow the knee and say, there's no greater reality than this. And that's why I think, but it's both and.
Well, I hate to leave John 6 uncontested. Way to bring that up at the very end.
Can I say one final thing real quick?
Okay, please.
Sorry, just because this is
friendly,
something.
Please,
No, I won't even be on John 6, but just so that people just keep in mind, right? That this is something that causes a lot of issues. Like certain, mostly cordial amongst friends, it's not going to be a big deal, but it does issue. Some people only go to certain churches who hold certain views, and certain people only go to conferences with people who are listening to people who only have certain views, right? So that's where you see kind of a lot of the division happening. So let me just make this point, and we can kind of end it out, is the thing we need to remember is both sides agree, or multiple sides agree, depending on, how many you want to consider here, are going to agree that when somebody says, I want to serve you, Jesus, I want to serve you, God, they can. The question is, how did they get to that point? That's what we're trying to sort out. Was it because they freely chose, or because God made them, or was there something else? But where all the sides are going to agree is somebody wants to bow the knee and say, I declare you as Lord. They are going to be able to do that. And I think that's ultimately what we need to remember, is that this is an opportunity. This is something that when people come to that point in their heart and say, yes, I believe, God has that door open.
Yeah, great. I love that. Well, thank you guys. This was fun, spirited conversation. Now, did we freely choose to have these views or not? I don't know. Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, share, please. That really helps us get the word out. And we hope you enjoyed this. If you want your question answered on the podcast, you can email wherewebeginat.lightengroup.org. And we'll see y'all next week. Bye. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to check out our Facebook and Instagram by searching Lighten Group. And if you want to know more about what we do or support us financially, please visit our website at lightengroup.org.